You need to, yeah. All right, we're getting you on the screen so people can see you.
I gotcha.
There you go.
Okay.
All right, now.
Well, hello. Now that you can see me, it's good to be here with you, you all this Sunday. I'm glad to be able to virtually attend St. Paul's again. And truth be told, unless you're also in the Zoom meeting with me, I cannot see you at all. So I have no way of knowing how many of you I already know or how many I haven't met yet. So for those of you who don't know me, or those of you who may just need a refresher, I'm Marcus. I'm a member of St. Paul's, currently living in Illinois and attending Chicago Theological Seminary. As may have been mentioned, today is Seminary Sunday in the UCC. And a few weeks ago, Pastor Ken reached out to me and asked me to give the message in church today. I'll be honest and say that I didn't really know that we had a Sunday to specifically honor seminaries and seminarians, but it's been over 2 years since I left Laramie, so it's probably a good a time as any for me to give my home congregation an update on what my seminary experience has been like. But first, I did want to talk a little bit about my experience at St. Paul's, because that experience is very closely linked with my decision to go to seminary in the first place. So the spring of 2016 was when I first began to attend St. Paul's. A lot happened that was leading me up to walking through those doors that first Sunday, and I don't really have time to talk about all of it. But I had recently discovered in my life that it was indeed possible to be a Christian and unapologetically gay at the time. For most of you in St. Paul's, that's probably not as big of a shock as it was to me at the time I realized it, but it was something that I was just getting used to. I was also yearning for a spiritual community to be a part of. But to be quite honest, I had absolutely no idea where to look. If I remember right, I think I literally just Googled the phrase LGBT church, Laramie, Wyoming. And I think St. Paul's was probably the first thing that popped up. And as I would soon come to know, the reason that St. Paul's was first in the search results is because in 2009, the members of this church decided to become an open and affirming congregation. If you haven't heard about it, the open and affirming designation is a covenant that the church takes to be open and affirming of LGBTQ people and their identities. And it's a public covenant that they make. I've heard that that process is not an easy one to undergo for some churches. I've heard it described by some as a congregational soul-searching moment. But I wasn't here when it happened at St. Paul's, so I can't really speak to what that process was like. But what I can speak to is what an impact that decision had on my life. I might not be in seminary right now if that decision hadn't happened. I might not even have met the person that I'm in love with if this congregation had not made a public statement to affirm LGBTQ people all those years ago. So I wanted to start out by saying that decisions like that have impacted me greatly. And so after I found St. Paul's on Google, I decided to make a visit. That first Sunday service that I attended made me feel so uncomfortable. I have to be honest, it was nobody's fault in the church. It was mostly an internal experience. I mean, the act of walking through the doors of an unfamiliar church for the first time provokes anxiety in many people, especially if they have been hurt by a church before. But after the service, I was invited to come to the fellowship hall for coffee and snacks. And in spite of my anxiety and uneasiness, I agreed. And I had a wonderful time. With sincere apologies to Pastor Ken, it wasn't the liturgy or the sermon that caused me to come back the following Sunday. It was the welcome I received. That Sunday was the first time in several years that I had been able to fellowship with Christians who explicitly welcomed and affirmed me fully. So I kept on attending. I got to know this wonderful church family. Eventually, I became a member and was asked to seek election to the church council, something I'm told that one of you needs to do. The congregation even gave me a scholarship to attend ecumenical advocacy days in Washington, D.C. one year. I felt truly blessed by this church during my time here. At several points while I was attending St. Paul's, other members hinted to me that maybe I should go into ministry. But by the time I had graduated from UW, I was still pretty unsure about whether or not I wanted to go to seminary or even pursue ministry at all. After all, seminary is difficult and very, very expensive. So instead, I decided to do a UCC internship program for a year. I packed up and moved all the way to Miami, Florida, where I worked part-time at a local UCC church and a ministry that was serving the unhoused residents of Miami. And my time in Miami was incredibly edifying and incredibly challenging. While I was there, I saw examples of ministry that were an amazing witness to the liberating and healing power of the gospel of Christ. I also saw examples of ministry that reminded me of the abusive spirituality that I was taught growing up. I began to develop a desire to learn more about ministry. After seeing both the life-giving and toxic forms of ministry happening in the world, I had a growing desire to contribute to some life-giving ministries. But I also began to realize that good intentions do not necessarily translate to proper actions. Many of the people that were engaged in the toxic ministries that I had witnessed truly believed that they were doing good. So I was going to have to learn a little bit. So in February of 2020, I decided to apply to seminary. I could no longer deny the sense of feeling called to ministry that I was experiencing. And I figured that if I wanted to be responsible with this call, I would need to study and learn so that I would contribute to ministry in a life-giving way and not a toxic one. As soon as I made my decision known to Pastor Ken and others at St. Paul's, I received such a heartfelt and encouraging support. As soon as I began my first semester, I received a scholarship from this church that helped me pay the alarmingly expensive and long list of books that I needed for class. Each semester since, I have received a scholarship from you all that has helped me continue my seminary education. I want to take a moment to tell you all from the bottom of my heart and the bottom of my wallet, thank you very, very much for your help. I never asked for the scholarship, but you sent it anyway. And it means a great deal to me that the church wants to support my education. Although I will be honest, there have been times during the almost 2 years I've been in seminary that I have wanted to give up and drop out. I'll admit it. The first semester I was registered for a full-time course load. I was thinking, I was full-time in undergrad, and I also worked part-time at Safeway. I should be fine. I should be able to work part-time in seminary and do full-time, no problem. How hard could grad school really be? Yeah, that thinking lasted until I was standing next to a stack of books that was about half as tall as I am. To tell the truth, I had to drop to being a half-time student after the first 2 weeks. Seminary is hard, y'all. Since then, the most I've been able to handle is being a 3/4 time student. See, there were several things about seminary that I was just not prepared for. First and foremost, I didn't fully comprehend just how much bulk reading was going to be involved. Second, I was not fully prepared for how academically rigorous seminary would be. I'll be the first to admit I am not the greatest student on the planet. High-level theological thinking is absolutely fascinating, but at times I feel like I was reading books and papers that made absolutely no sense to me. And third, I was not prepared for how much seminary would affect me spiritually. Going into seminary, I assumed that I was going to go on this great and enriching spiritual experience. I was going to be diving into the riches of scripture and learning the deep mysteries of God. I assumed that seminary would somehow automatically make me feel closer to God than ever before. But in reality, the opposite was kind of true. For my first couple of semesters, it was hard to pray most of the time, even in church. I was constantly thinking and in my head about theology of how I was praying and what I was praying for. It was also hard to read the Bible as a spiritual book for a couple of weeks. My classes were mostly focused on analyzing the Bible as a historical document and understanding it in its original historical context. It was hard to let the text speak to me spiritually. I also learned a lot about the history of Christianity and how many people it had deeply, deeply hurt throughout its history. At my most emotionally down times, I wondered secretly if I truly did want to commit my life to ministry in this religion. But I pushed through the difficulty. I began to understand that seminary was not just going to download a mature, deep, and life-sustaining faith into me. In seminary, I was going to have to learn how to struggle with my faith. I was going to have to learn how to wrestle with scripture and with church history in order to be blessed by them. Going to seminary has made my understanding of Christian history, the Bible, and my own faith much more complicated. In relation to our scripture readings for today, I somewhat naively thought that seminary was going to be comparable to the mountaintop experiences that Jesus and his disciples had. One of the other readings that we didn't get to today that's in the lectionary is the story of how Moses went up to Mount Sinai to receive the law of God. And afterwards, he came down and his face was radiant and shining from the glory of God. And I was anticipating seminary would be this experience of going up the mountain to learn about God and the mysteries of faith. I was hoping to have my faith and piety strengthened to a degree that, like Moses, people would be able to feel God's love and glory radiating off me. I mean, what can I say? Sometimes I have fantasies of grandeur about myself. But that's not at all what seminary was like. First off, there are no mountains in Illinois. I couldn't go up a mountain. But also, seminary has done more to make me question my faith and to critically examine how I interpret the Bible than it has done to give me warm, fuzzy feelings or a sense of sureness. I still do have faith, but I think that faith is different now. I think that faith hopefully is stronger and more mature. So seminary has overall been a humbling experience for me, both academically and spiritually. I've learned that there is no shame in slowing down and pursuing my education at a pace that I can handle. I've also learned that there is more value in being unsure, asking tough questions, and doing the hard work of faith than there is in being sure, confident, and overly pious. So I've given my overall takeaway from seminary so far, but what's in store next? Well, I'm still going to be attending seminary virtually for a while. The pandemic put seminary almost fully online, and I've gotten used to that. And it's easier to do classes online than it is to drive all the way to Chicago once a week. But in the most immediate, also eventually I'm going to have to start thinking about internships at churches and chaplaincy residencies. But for the most immediate future, I'm actually going to be moving back to the Mountain West soon. Unfortunately, I won't be all that close to Laramie though. Many of you know my partner, Nathan, who I got to know because he was an accompanist here at St. Paul's for a while. In December, he actually graduated from the University of Illinois with his master's in library science. Starting in April, he will be starting as a librarian at Montana State University in Billings. So we'll be moving there at the end of March. I'll be somewhat closer So maybe I'll have to find an excuse to come visit you all in person sometime. But for now, we will both have to settle for my visits being over Zoom. And so once again, I want to thank you all for your support while I've been in seminary. I want to thank you for being the community that I needed you to be when I walked through those doors all those years ago. And I look forward to learning more about what you all have been up to when I'm at annual meeting over Zoom later today. So it's been good to talk to you all. Amen.
Marcus, can you see the people now?
I could see a little bit. It's still a small on my screen.
Well, I turned the camera around so you could see the people that were here today.
Hello.